All right, so we're now recording and then we're now live on Facebook. And we'll see if I can figure out this YouTube thing. All right, well, good evening and welcome to Oakland Voices Live. I'm Rasheed Shabazz and I'll be hosting tonight. Tonight we have Kat Brooks, the co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project. And so we're gonna have a live conversation with her about COVID-19, policing, and inequality in Oakland. But first, I want to just tell you a little bit more about Oakland Voices, as well as tell you a little bit about Kat. So first, Oakland Voices is a program of the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education, and Oakland Voices tonight is our bi-weekly broadcast focusing on lifting up the voices of Oakland. And tonight, again, we're joined by Kat Brooks. Kat is a longtime performer, organizer, and activist, and she co-hosts UpFront on KPFA. She played a central role in the struggle for justice for Oscar Grant and has spent the last decade working with impacted communities and families to rapidly respond to police violence and radically transform the ways our communities are policed and incarcerated. She co-founded the Anti-Police Terror Project, APTP, and is the executive director of the Justice Teams Network. Kat was also a mayoral candidate in the 2018 election in Oakland, and she faced off with the incumbent Libby Schaaf. So welcome, Kat.
Hey.
It's good to see you. So before we get into the conversation, how are you doing?
That's a loaded question, Rasheed. These are intense times. These are really, really intense times. I locked down for shelter in place 2 weeks before the mandate came out because I was watching the virus from the minute it hit Wuhan and just sort of tracking it. And well, you know this, I still struggle with cigarettes and I have asthma and I've got a partial right lung. So I locked down immediately because I was really clear that for me, it could be a death sentence. And that just like the anxiety of that and the stress and the strain of that was so intense. And I think you combine that with then of course, this current iteration of the movement. It's been a long, what are we, 4 or 5 months now? 4 months, whatever we are. But I'm good. I'm excited about the movement in the streets. I'm excited about the possible wins. I got to spend some time on a mountain. I was still working. Everybody thinks they're like, oh, you took a break. No, I just was like, well, I can work from my counter in West Oakland or I can work from a cabin in the mountains. So that was good. But I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm glad to be.
That's good to hear. We kept hearing like almost like threats or promises that you would come down from the mountain.
And I did. Like I kept coming and going and coming and going, and I was like, okay, you know what, Kat? This like you just have to be home. So.
Yeah, and I want to come back more and just find out more about what your experience was. You going and telling on the mountain. But with so much going on, I've been really struggling to figure out where to begin. And so I was thinking of just going back to when I first met you, and that was during the struggle for justice for Oscar Grant. Can you share a little bit about how you got involved in that movement and really just the movement to end police terror?
Right. So I've been an organizer most of my adult life. My political home is Community Coalition in South Los Angeles that was founded by now Congresswoman Karen Bass. And that's where I had my political education. And that's where I learned how to be an organizer, like, what that actually means and the skill set of being an organizer. It's also where I learned to be a communications person. And I ended up in Oakland because we had a really successful educational campaign that got all kids access to A to G classes. And they wanted to replicate it in Oakland. And so I came up here and that was my primary focus. In addition, I was organizing with the Black August BAOC, Black August Organizing Committee, which is where I met the comrades I rock with now. But I'm originally from Las Vegas, and so I would go home for the holidays, and I had come back, right after New Year's, and I was getting ready to turn my corner. I lived off of 14th and Alice, which makes me giggle because I could never afford to live there now, but that's where I lived.
Wow.
And this guy was like, "Hey sis, do you know where that rally is at?" And I was like, "What rally?" He said, "For the brother they killed," and I literally had no idea what he was talking about. Because even just one state away, it just wasn't on the news, and I wasn't on social media like that then. And man, I ran inside. My daughter was little bitty, and I saw the video, and I talk about it as my enough moment. Like something shifted in me that day. You have those moments where you're clear that nothing's ever going to be the same, but you don't know exactly what that means. It's not like I was like, oh, now I'm going to focus the next, rest of my life working on police terror. It wasn't that. It was, I had to move in a different way. And so I started volunteering with CAPE, which was the Coalition Against Police Executions, which was the first sort of configuration of people that came together under the leadership of Sister Derica Blackman. And that formation lasted about 3 weeks. And then we ended up forming the Justice for Oscar Grant Coalition, which was made up of all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life and organizations, and really ended up, leading the resistance, at least in the streets, for the next 3 years of that protracted struggle. And then that was just it. And then things just sort of took a course of their own. And here we are.
Yeah. And, just thinking back to that time, there seemed to be some parallels between the Oscar Grant movement and some of the responses around the police murders of both George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So I want to ask you your perspective on that. What's the same? What's different this time?
Well, I think I struggle with that question a little bit, Rasheed, because movements ebb and flow, right? So this isn't a new movement. This is an iteration of a very long movement, and particularly an iteration of the movement that, to my mind and to the mind of a lot of people in the country, that kicked off again full steam with Oscar Grant, right? And the protracted struggle that we had on the streets for 3 years that led to ultimately the garbage.
Johannes Mesley being incarcerated for a year and a half.
I was like, a day? How long was he there? A day and a half?
In county jail. He wasn't in prison like any of us might be.
Right. And then you carry that into, and so also it's important for people to understand that we had military response here then too. The first time that happened was not in Ferguson. I mean, all due respect to the Ferguson activists, I love them. And it's important that we're clear about that. And then of course we had Ferguson, which, dovetailed with the Black Lives Matter movement. And then now we're here. But what I think is important for people to understand is that the streets may get quieter, but they're never silent, right? The organizing never stops. And the only reason why we're able to be in this moment right now is because of the work that's been happening every single day over the last 10 years. And so, but if I would have to say, what's different, I think the fact that we've had the orange dude in the White House, has created a very different political atmosphere, and the attacks, not just on Black bodies, but brown bodies, Indigenous bodies, queer bodies, I think is critical to this moment. I think the ways in which, it's not just Oakland where we have gentrification and explosion of unhoused populations. That's all over the country. Same thing in terms of working class people being able to get paid a living wage. And then I think when you combine that with this pandemic, like I was talking about earlier, that has had people cooped up in the house and terrified and scared and angry about the way that our country responded. And then on top of that, people have lost their jobs, or they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs, and they've lost loved ones, or they've gotten sick. I think it just was sort of the perfect
storm
for things to explode. People are like, well, how can you go outside? You might catch a virus. I was like, I think for a lot of people, particularly Black people, they're like, what the hell I'm worried about this virus for? I could catch a bullet from a cop's gun anytime I walk out of the house, right? There's 2 pandemics that we're in right now. Right. There's the pandemic of COVID-19 and there's the pandemic of police terror. And so I think you're seeing those things meet and explode in a particular kind of way.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. So I want to get into a little bit of learning more about the Anti-Police Terror Project. As I recall, you had out of the Oscar Grant movement had co-founded the Onyx Organizing Committee. So can you share what is police terror and how did an ATPT emerge?
Well, I'm only going to answer your question if you say it right. APTP.
What did I say?
Yeah, you said ATPT. But it's my fault. It's my fault. I cursed myself because I fought for that name.
You could have made a cooler acronym for me, I got a gap. It's hard to say these things.
I did. I fought. They wanted to name it something else, and I just was like, no. And now I'm just like, oh Lord, it sounds like a disease.
So the Anti-Police Terror Project. What is police terror, and how did the APTP emerge?
So I'll start with what is police terror. So we call it terror because, and this I actually borrow from Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., that when we water down the language of what's happening to us, then we water down the people's will to resist. So it's not gentrification, they're land grabs, they're not prisons or concentration camps, and it's not brutality, it's terror. And the definition of terror, in Webster, and I'm paraphrasing here, but is the use of violence or force in order to uphold a political agenda. And that's exactly what our police force is. They were born out of both the slave trade and the Calvaries. Their job was to, catch, kill, incarcerate Black folks for the purpose of upholding the status quo, which at that time, and one could argue today, was about using Black bodies for white profit. And that's still their job, is to uphold the status quo. And it's important when we talk about this that we see when they kill us as being the most egregious, the most extreme version of that terror, right? But we're terrorizing our community every day, living in communities where it feels like you have an occupying army with militarized weapons rolling around. That's a form of terror. For women of color, particularly Black women, the primary way we experience police violence is through sexual assault and rape. When you've got police jacking up brothers or sisters, trying to make $1 on the corner, stealing their product, beating them up and rolling, that's terror. When you're talking about people running in your house with no knock warrants, that's terror. The list goes on and on, being racially profiled. The fact that all my L's could be straight and I'm gonna get pulled over and I start to sweat and shake and my heart starts to race and right? And because you have no idea whether or not you were going to die. And that is the reaction of every single Black person on the planet when they get pulled over, particularly in this country. And so that's why we call it terror, because it's a constant assault on our minds, our bodies, and our spirits. And then when you think about it, what it's like to be a group of people who every single day, when your child or your husband or your wife or your partner or whomever leaves the house, that one of the things that you're terrified of is that they might accidentally come across law enforcement, but that they legitimately might not make it home. Waking up every day and legitimately feeling like you're hunted, right? That your people are hunted, and it's free. What do you call it? It's a free for all on Black lives.
Sounds in the town they used to refer to that as open season.
Open season. That's actually what I was looking for. Thank you. It's open season.
Wow. So for those just tuning in, you're listening to Cap Brooks, the co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project. Over the last few years, I've seen you participate in and organize a lot of different protests. I mean, countless protests and actions in Oakland, throughout the Bay Area. Marches at OPD headquarters, the sheriff's office, the Black Friday shutdown, where you all shut down the West Oakland BART, or the entire BART system, but from West Oakland. I even saw a photo of you in Alameda with a brother in a Santa suit. So before we discuss the recent, protests and murders, I'm interested in just understanding what direct action is, and if there's different types of protests. Like for those who are watching it, what are some of the different things they may be seeing with these different protests in the street?
I mean, I think the first thing that people need to understand is that direct action is a tactic, not a strategy, right? So it's a form of escalation in a longer term campaign. I think for a minute there, folks were like DA happy, just keep shutting shit down, and eventually we're gonna get what we want. But it's a powerful tactic and it's an important tactic, but it's definitely not strategy. And so you mentioned, the West Oakland BART shutdown, which for people who don't know, that was Community Ready Corps, Blackout Collective, APTP, Black Lives Matter Bay Area. And see, I'm afraid I'm gonna forget somebody, and then someone's gonna send me an email and cuss me out. But it was a collective, and we shut down the West Oakland BART station on Black Friday, the busiest shopping day of the year. And our intention was to hold the space for the amount of time that they left Mike Brown's body in the street, which was 4 hours and I think 28 minutes or something like that. But that was, that we didn't come out the gate doing that. That was, it made sense as part of a strategy that was taking place across the nation within the longer term campaign justice for Mike Brown. So that's an example of DA and how it's supposed to be used. What was the other part of your question?
So I think like there are instances where you'll see something like that, direct action targeting BART, or even the recent F Your Curfew protests, where it was in response to something. Yeah, I'm gonna say F asterisk CK your curfew, but that may be different from when people just kind of walk on the freeway, and so not knocking freeway walking or blocking, but just for people to understand that, just understand what are people doing, because there's some folks who are like, well, protesting don't do anything. And so that question is kind of in response to that, but then also just understanding some of the different ways that people may choose to demonstrate.
Yeah, I mean, there's a wide variety of options that people have based on, who your target is and what makes sense. To me, the vigils that we have after cops murder people, that's not direct action, but that's a form of protest. It's a healing protest, but it's a form of protest. When folks chose to occupy the front lawn outside of the city hall during Occupy, that was a form of protest. It took the pain of the people directly to the entity that had the ability to ease the pain of the people.
Yeah.
And for people to say that protests don't do anything, I will refer us back to the F Your Curfew protest. That effectively ended the curfew. I mean, literally the next day the curfew was done. Right? Nobody went to jail that night. People were in the streets dancing, doing their thing all night. Nobody went to jail because we had ended the curfew, and because it was a statement to authority of what we were able to do. We brought 8,000 people in the streets in 24 hours, right?
Yeah.
In 24 hours. Or I'll point to the defund OPD campaign. We've been working on that campaign for 5 years. For 5 years, we've been working on that campaign, and we haven't. The most mass actions that you've seen around it are recently. So we did things like joined coalitions that wanted to impact the city budget. We've lobbied people. We've done graphics. We've done community education, popular education, different comm strategies, speaking at city council meetings, right? And it just increases. And so there's different ways to protest, but organizing and protest is the only way we ever get from A to B, let alone all the way to Z.
Okay. And so with, all the mass protests that have been happening in the last few weeks, I mean, not just in Minneapolis or Atlanta or Oakland, but it's around the country and all the way around the globe. And there's been a lot of focus on looting and rioting. I'm interested, considering your background in journalism, what do you think about the media coverage?
It's a teensy tiny bit less annoying than it was the last time. I feel like, first of all, they're not riots, they're rebellions or uprisings. And I heard I was interviewing Brendan Woods, the Alameda County DA, on my show this morning, and I was asking him about the cases that they were seeing come through the DA's office in relation to the protests. And a lot of the cases that they're getting are people that were in the stores the next day, right? Wow. And poor people trying to find something to sell, to eat, or food, or something. These are the next day. So we're not even talking about night of. We're talking about the next day. But that said, and it's funny. I remember when this was going on in Ferguson, I was on some mainstream radio show or whatever, and we got in this big fight about whether or not it was a riot or a rebellion, and all I said is righteous rage. It is righteous rage, right? Like stop killing us, and you don't have to worry about people burning stuff down. I'm trying to be respectful, Rasheed. I know you don't like that language.
Thank you.
I'm trying. You know, if they had just arrested those 4 officers, you know, in Minneapolis, might not burn to the ground. So it's the wrong conversation to be having. You know, so my tactic is not, you know, partly because I'm old. I don't, you know, go set things on fire. But some people do, and it's out of anger. And why I said it's slightly better, I had I actually just did an interview with some news outlet, and she wanted to talk about rioting and looting. And I had to call her before. I was like, what are you really trying to get at? I said, because I'm not going to be put in a position where you do this good protester, bad protester thing. It's not helpful to the movement, and that's not how I get down. And she, her perspective was no. She's like, right now, I only have OPD's version. She's like, from my perspective, it's just a different tactic of protest. And it was an old white lady. So we were able to have like a sensible conversation. And I feel like there's been more of those sensible conversations than I've seen either during Occupy or, you know, the Ferguson moment, and certainly around the Oscar Grant moment.
Yeah, and you mentioned, you know, this idea around tactics. And so there's this phrase I've heard in the streets, the diversity of tactics. Can you explain what that means for folks and your understanding of that?
So my understanding of that is that people is basically what I just said. People are going to protest in different ways, and we may not agree. But what we do agree on is that we have a common enemy, right? So our enemy is the state. It's not each other. So I'm not gonna, you know, throw somebody under the bus. I mean, I'm certainly not going to snitch or come out publicly against people that are protesting, because it just makes it easier for the state to target that particular group of people, and that's just less people that we have on the street resisting.
Okay, understood. And so, you know, with the recent protests that have been happening in Oakland, the curfew, there was an interesting moment where there was this first protest where your organization didn't lead it, but, you know, you issued sort of a not guidelines, but some suggestions for folks, cautionary note. But then there was later a lot of support for the youth-led protest from Oakland Tech that, you know, Oakland Police later tear gassed the young folks. But I mean, it's just so many things happening. There was a meeting tonight where the Oakland City Council, you know, voted 7-1 to kind of ban tear gas. And so it's just a lot happening in Oakland. And so I'm hoping you could just kind of lay some of that out for us. What is going on in the town?
Well, from my perspective, the most important thing that's going down in the town, and this is, you know, again, my perspective, and y'all will be tired of hearing me talk about it pretty soon, is that we are in the middle of a budget revision. So the Oakland budget cycle happens every 2 years. And in the middle of the first year, there's what is called a May revise, right? And so that's, we've got more money than we thought, we've got less money than we've thought, how are we gonna spend our money for this next year? And it just so happens that the May revise hit at the same time that this movement moment happened. And so while there may be other places in the country where people are saying defund the police, if it's not during a budget cycle, it's actually not something that can actually happen. Whereas here, in this particular moment, it can actually happen because they have to vote on budget amendments. And Nikki Fortunato Bass, it's not $150 million, but she did put in a proposal for a $25 million reduction in the Oakland Police Department's budget, which would be the biggest reduction, I think, in the history of ever for the police department. And for folks who don't understand, OPD gets 46% of our general fund. Meanwhile, we don't have money for parks or schools or summer jobs or artists or mental health or substance abuse. So that's one thing that's happening right now. The other thing is you're seeing a lot of mutual aid take place in a really beautiful way. I'm going to big up Community Ready Corps, you know, who doing the job of the city and getting out masks and sanitizer and information to vulnerable Black people. But you also see, you know, folks doing mutual aid for artists, folks doing mutual aid for disabled folks. So there's a lot of amazing organizing on that front. And then, yeah, to your point, Rasheed, like people are just taking the mantle and running. So I think it was Sunday, the days are blurring together, but I was on Facebook and it was like car caravan taking over the Bay Bridge right now. I was like,
what? The Bay Bridge.
But I texted
or the Golden Gate Bridge.
No, I think this was the Bay Bridge. They did the Golden Gate Bridge earlier. This was Bay.
Okay.
And I was like, who? And then I was like full of joy that I was laying on my couch on Sunday, and I texted the team and I was like, this is so beautiful. I said, did anybody know? Did anybody out of the entire squad know this was happening? Nobody knew. I said, that's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. The tech march. The other thing that's happening is a real concentrated effort on the parts of organizations like Community Ready Corps, like Courage, APTP, to really use this as a moment to put leadership into the hands of the young people. So, the young people led the first Eric Salgado March. They're leading an action at Infirmary Park. There's a Black-Brown Youth Action that's happening tomorrow. And so you're really seeing, these babies that grew up in this, in the last 10 years that we're talking about organizing, being ready to take the baton and move with it. And that for me, like, I'm gonna get a little, because my baby's one of those babies. I don't know if you saw.
I saw the photo.
Saw her speech, but so it's just, to me, it's really beautiful because it means that collectively as organizers that we've been doing what we're supposed to do, which is raise up the next generation. And I was talking to Rosa Clemente the other day, and like now, like some of us, I'm not quite ready to get all the way out the streets, but it's okay. I know it's almost time for me to be at home writing or doing interviews or doing art or, whatever, holding political education circles for the kids, whatever it is. And that gives me hope because that means the work is going to continue to the next place. So that to me is like really special that we're seeing right now.
Right on. I want to stick around this whole thing with the curfew for a moment because, what was interesting is that, the curfew got dropped after, young folks were tear gassed in Oakland. And so these very young people you mentioned were the ones who maybe that was their first protest. I don't know. But, being tear gassed, it feels very personal. But I want to go back a little bit to 2015. I remember when you led the Say Her Name protest in downtown Oakland, and there was a curfew imposed then. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite organizing stories, and it's why Libby Schaaf hates me so much. She's a Scorpio, and she doesn't like to lose. So it was, it was Say Her Name, and we had done, as a collective, a day of actions. And that night there was a plan for Black women and children and elders to march to the Oakland Police Department from Oscar Grant Plaza. And we were told after we had gathered that there was a new rule. I was on the phone with I was being police liaison and told Kat, you all can't march after sundown. I said, what are you talking about? He said, new rule, if you march after sundown, you'll be arrested. And I said, this particular officer, I said, now you know what's gonna happen now, right? What are you saying to me? And he said, Kat, if his exact word, Kat, if your boot touches the other side of the curb, after 6, whatever time it was, he was like, you're going to jail. I said, well, you do what you got to do. And we marched. And we got to the Oakland Police Department, and there was they tried to block us, and then there was some negotiation that happened that would allow us to get all the way to the police station.
It was about not being on the street, but like staying
be on the sidewalk. That's what it was.
Yeah, I'd be out there.
And clearly, because my history better than I do. And we got to the police station and we had our program, and Rasheed, I was walking back, I was so mad. I don't know who I was madder at. I don't know if I was madder at Libby or if I was madder at myself because I compromised. I do remember we compromised. It wasn't all up to me. I do remember, I don't think we had security out there that night. I mean, I think and we had lots of elders and babies. And so we were really sort of assessing what was possible in that moment. But on the way back, I just started calling, texting, tweeting every single reporter I knew, from Darwin to Henry Lee to Davey. I mean, everybody. I was like, Libby just imposed a sundown law.
Oakland is now sundown town. What's going
Oakland is now a sundown town, and boy, it was on and popping. And that was another beautiful show of solidarity. So we didn't call all of those protests. There was a series of protests that went on for several days, and folks were just stepping up in solidarity. And this affinity group would have a protest, and another one would have a protest. And she was trying to get the black pastors to come calm us down. The black pastors were calling me like, "Kat, what you want us to say in this meeting?" And then it was in between two protests, and I was trying to take a nap, and she called my phone. And
the mayor called you?
Libby called me.
Libby. Okay.
And she was like, "I'm not gonna lift the curfew, but I'm here to listen if you want." And I was like, "Well, since you started that way, there's really nothing left to say. So I'll see you in the streets." So finally, so it was massive police, repression, massive. They were just really trying to knock people out of the streets. So finally, we had this big march planned, and I mean nothing. It was eerie. There were no cops anywhere, and we did what the people do. We marched from OG Plaza. We marched around the lake. We marched down Grand. We marched, through the banking district. Up Broadway. Nothing. No drama, no trauma, nothing. And we got back to 14th and Broadway and had a big ass dance party because we were clear we had won. That she had attempted to set us up because she was so sure that she would be, that somebody would break a window or set something on fire, and then she'd be able to go, "See, this is why we need a curfew." And without even that's why I love the people, even without communicating about it. No one said nothing about it. The people just knew. They just knew. And so that was the first time we beat a curfew in my tenure here in Oakland. and same thing, next day, no curfew.
Yeah. Right on. Thank you, Kat. Well, for those just joining in, you're listening to Oakland Voices tonight. We're live with Kat Brooks, co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project, as well as the executive director of the Justice Teams Network. Just some little storytelling with Kat, tales from the town, protesting. So, I want to shift a little bit to talking about what's before this most recent uptick of the pandemic of racism. We're dealing with the pandemic of COVID-19. In April, your organization called for a Black New Deal for Oakland. Now, full disclosure for those watching, I am a signatory of the Black New Deal as a part of a collective of Muslims I'm a part of called Habari Ummah. And so just want to be transparent with that. But the Black New Deal, the Black Oakland demands in light of COVID-19 and rates of Black death. And the demands range from stuff around health, housing, transportation, and education. Can you talk a little bit about how the Black New Deal came about? And so far, what has been the response to those demands?
Sure. So I'm trying to keep this story shorter than the other ones. Essentially, my comrade, Melina Abdullah in Los Angeles, who runs BLM LA, she asked APTP to sign on to a list of demands that they had created around COVID-19. And I was like, shoot, this looks...
Shoot, thank you.
Shucks. This looks dope. And so, she was good with us doing it here. And then so Community Ready Corps, actually in APTP, decided to convene a large group of Black leaders across, all sorts of walks of life to walk through, what are the immediate needs and what are the long-term needs. And part of it is that we saw what has come. We saw what was coming. We knew that Black people were going to be the most impacted by COVID in terms of infection and death. Now, the medical industry and even the mainstream media's narrative is that the reason why Black people are catching and dying from COVID-19 at such high rates is because of pre-existing medical conditions. We say no. We are catching and dying of COVID-19 because pre-existing social conditions that then create the pre-existing medical conditions. And so we wanted immediate, things like we wanted testing centers in the East. We wanted PPE in the East and West for Black people. We wanted funding for solid community messengers, the things that we knew right now were going to save lives: masks, sanitizer, testing, and the contact tracing, but a contact tracing done in a way that doesn't further criminalize Black people. Okay. But then we were clear, this is a moment to actually talk about structural systemic racism that has existed, not only in Oakland, but, across this country from the first, enslaved African that was kidnapped and brought here. And really looking at, okay, what are the roles that housing plays in this, right? How do you shelter in place if you're outside and 80% of our unhoused population are Black? What is the role that the environment plays in this? Well, East and West Oakland have some of the dirtiest air quality, in the town. Like one of the things that should have immediately done is shut down the
incinerator.
Yeah, the incinerator in East Oakland. So, we have what's called the West Oakland cough. That's the cough. You don't have to be a smoker, right? You live in West Oakland, you more than likely got the West Oakland cough. So how to do with cleaning up the environment. Looking at the economic impact of the recession of COVID-19, hardest hit are going to be small Black businesses. So how is the city going to help small Black businesses reinvest and get on their feet? And so we wanted to have an immediate conversation, but also use this as a longer term conversation and be like, we are seeing literally in the numbers of dead bodies, the impact of the social conditions that this capitalist neoliberal administration is inflicting upon our bodies, and we wanted to wedge that open. Now, we also did it in Sacramento, and so we're looking at what statewide Black New Deal looks like. I do have to shout out Sister Carol Fife. Calling it the Black New Deal was her idea, and I think it's brilliant. And so, there was a resolution that what do I want to say here? A resolution went forth. The 3Ls did not support it on council. They instead said that they
like okay. I'm sorry. When you say 3L, I know some law students. I was like, what? 3L?
Lauren, Lynette, and Larry didn't. They were not supportive. So we're trying now to figure out like what comes next. We're not done.
I'm sorry, I got to jump in. So the 3 African American council members did not support a Black New Deal for Oakland.
No, they wanted to come up with their own agenda through something that they are now calling the Equity Caucus.
Okay.
I've never heard of that before, but we'll see what happens. So moving on.
Yeah, I mean, I have more questions, but yeah, that's an interesting moment.
We're gonna move on.
You live in Area 3, District 3, 6, and 7. That's interesting. So, part of the New Deal dealt with police, and it was interesting because, you all did this prior to this moment, and amongst the demands included defunding the Oakland Police. And so I'm interested in how what's your understanding, or, what's the vision? What does it mean to defund Oakland Police? What does that look like?
Right. So currently the Oakland Police Department, I think I said this earlier, forgive me if I'm repeating myself.
Yeah, you said like 40% of the budget.
So almost half of the general fund. And you have to remember, so that's off top. That doesn't include what they rob out of the general fund for unapproved overtime. That doesn't include what they cost the city in lawsuits every year, right? Like they are sucking a dumb amount of money out of the city of Oakland to not really do very much. Crime both here and across the country, crime has been going steadily down over the last 2 decades. It's not a result of police and policing. We're actually clear that police and policing doesn't keep us that safe, because if America could police our way, and you've been hearing me say this for years, if America could police and incarcerate our way to safety, we'd be the safest place in the world, because we do that more than any other country on the planet, more than several countries combined. So the call for defunding police is asking for half of that police budget to be redirected into things that actually do keep us safe. So if you look at the people, let's just take Santa Rita Jail. If you look at the people that are sitting in Santa Rita Jail, they're not people primarily that have been involved in some act of violence or sexual assault. The vast majority of those people are either in there because of a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue. And so what would it look like to redirect funds so that we have 24/7 mental health crisis responders teams here in the city of Oakland who actually are not police, because 50% of the people that law enforcement kills are dealing with a mental health crisis. So we very clearly have established that responding to mental health crisis with a badge and a gun is a bad idea. What if we redirected some of those funds to substance abuse prevention and treatment, right? And helping people get on their feet. We've got 8,000 unhoused people on the street. So like we were talking earlier about the cases that are coming in from the looting. This is the next day. These are people hungry and poor, trying to feed their families. So we invest in public housing on public land. You remember the year that Libby forgot to apply for the summer jobs money, and the violence, right? Like just ticked up. What would it look like to double, triple, quadruple job programs for young Black people, in East and West Oakland? What would it look like to give grants to schools so that our young people get quality education? What would it look like to invest in Black business? I mean, like, there's all of these things that we could do that actually improve the quality of life. Karen Bass said once, and I stole it from her, if people can't make a living in the above ground economy, they're going to make a living in the underground economy. People are going to eat. And so we have a choice about whether we do that on the front end, we do it on the back end. And so the Black New Deal and defunding the police purports that we should do it on the front end, because the data bears it out. When people have what they need, communities thrive. When they don't, we don't.
As much as I know you're in the streets, Cat Brooks, that could have been a beautiful campaign stump speech. I know in 2018 you challenged Libby Schaaf. Do we have to wait 2 years for a rematch, or is there any is there anything coming out, electoral strategy?
Well, there won't be a rematch because Libby's termed out, so it'll be a wide open field. She can't run again, thank God. Thank Jah, thank whoever. That's done. We just have to, our concern about Libby is that she's gonna run for state office and be able to impact.
She's the resistance.
Yeah, she's the resistance. So it'll be an open field, and so we'll see. It made sense actually as a political strategy to run in 2018. I would like to say we got 43,000 first place votes. We were the runner up in most cities. If you get 40,000 votes, you are the mayor. So we'll see what happens. If it makes political sense and it's something that the people ask me to do, then it is something that we as a collective will consider.
Yeah, thank you. So, as we start to wind down a little bit, I want to open up some space for some of our Oakland Voices correspondents. And again, for folks just tuning in, you're listening to Cat Brooks, co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project. I'm Rasheed Shabazz, one of the coordinators for our Oakland Voices. And I want to open up space for, make sure she's still here, either Brandy or Tony. We saw that you had submitted some questions earlier, and I want to just let you, either one of you get in. So we'll go to Brandy first, and then we'll let Tony ask his question. And if we have opportunity, another one of our correspondents, Mary Lou, also had a question. Yes.
Hey, Kat.
Thank you, Brandy.
Hello. So my question to you is, let me see, I had it written down. Aside from protesting and contacting our local officials, what are some actions that we individuals and citizens can do to stay involved and take other actions?
Right. So there's definitely a role for everybody. I joke all the time, like not everybody likes to eat tear gas. It's an acquired taste. So, the most important one, well, there's lots of things you can do, right? So there's all sorts of movement supports that need. So if you're a communications person, we always need more comms people. Once we're out of this pandemic, folks need childcare, they need food. We need to be teaching skill sets to ourselves and each other. Are you a medic? Do you know how to grow food? Do you know how to grow herbs? I think right now it's also really important to build alternative models. So what are things that you identify that we are leaning on law enforcement to do that maybe we don't need to lean on them to do anymore? And find like-minded people to engage in that work. If you're an artist, make art. If you're a writer, write. Read, get your political education on. Geez, there's so much, and I do think organization is important. And so, if you can't find a home in one of the 8,962 progressive groups here in the Bay Area, start your own. But whatever it is, identify, build neighborhood solidarity. Know your neighbors. Talk to your neighbors. What skill sets exist in your neighborhood? Defend Black life, right? Come to city council meetings. Well, we can't go anywhere now. I mean, it's such a long list. And I do think, and it's funny because this isn't something I would have said 10 years ago, you have to vote. I mean, we really have to vote. Not only just vote, but we need to identify candidates with a track record of political progressiveness. And I mean progressive in the realest sense of the word, not the way it's been co-opted in this moment. Identify candidates and run them, right? Run our people and support them and get behind them. And then once we get them in there, hold them accountable. Don't get them in there and then walk away, because then they're lost inside of this system that wasn't built for people like us to survive. So those are a few things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Go over to Tony.
Yeah, hey, Ms. Brooks.
Kat, please.
Kat. June 3rd, probably, I imagine, will be a highlight of my life for the rest of my life. Did you hang out and admire your handiwork, or were you on to the next at 10 o'clock?
I wasn't onto the, but I don't know if you heard, Tony, that I have a partial right lung and I have asthma. And so for me, COVID literally could be a death sentence. So it was literally risking my life to be out there in the first place. So I bounced. I was like, I'd been out there 3 hours and I was like, I don't know if you saw me, I was putting hand sanitizer on my gloves.
Got it. I was running away. I didn't have a hoodie, so I was freezing.
Yeah, so I saw some of it on Facebook. It was beautiful. I mean, it was beautiful what happened afterwards. And it's also like, it's not our job as organizers like to hold the streets the whole time, right? Like at some point, you got to give the streets to the people and let them do, with it what they were gonna do. And the people chose to dance and boogie and say scream "fuck your curfew" for another few hours, and that brought me great joy.
I'm glad, because that I just felt like a huge corner was turned on that night, and I wanted you to hear me say that.
Oh, right on, Tony. Thank you.
Tony, you want to ask that other part of your question?
I think I already know the answer, but yes, I'll ask it. The other part of the question that I submitted to him was, when you were leaving, like what did you think was going to happen?
I had no idea. I knew the people weren't going to go home. I knew that, right? I knew the people weren't ready to go home. The music had already started playing. People had started dancing. I mean, and let me be clear, I bounced. Members of the squad stayed, right? So it wasn't like we all just like dipped. But yeah, I mean, I figured the people were going to protest in the way they're going to protest. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but I did make a joke that night. I was like, I can't tell y'all what to do, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. And I looked around, I was like, well, it don't matter what I say. I don't think there's any windows left to break, right?
Yeah.
So I figured people would kick it. I knew it was going to be a dance party, but I figured people would kick it for a while, hold the intersection, a little longer, and then they would go home or not.
I want to jump in. Tony, you inspired me with another question. I think about how people want to hold, organizers responsible for stuff. And I know you've been threatened with weird lawsuits and other stuff like that. But I also think about how the families of people impacted by police violence are often kind of brought before the public and asked to, tell people to protest peacefully. People condemn Mike Brown's stepfather when he said, "burn this down." And so I'm interested in asking you, like, how do you, because you do that work, like, Mama Wanda and Uncle Bobby and so many family members, like, I want to ask you about that part of the work of working directly with the families, but then also like how they are then put in the position to be somewhat like symbolic of movements, and what are your thoughts around that?
So the first thing I guess that I'll say is that is the most humbling and piece of my work for me, is that I have the privilege of working with, standing by, supporting, loving on, being in relationship with some of the strongest people on the planet. I can't imagine losing my loved one in that way. And they're so resilient. And they just keep fighting. And even though it's traumatizing and it's triggering for them, they tell their story over and over and over and over and over again in the hopes that, like, if I just tell my story one more time, that this will never happen to, another family. And it very quickly becomes, shockingly to me sometimes still, very quickly about, this isn't just about my child. Like, very quickly, that this is about all of the families. And I say all that to say that families are not a monolith, right? So there are families that very much do not want people to burn stuff or break stuff in the name of their loved one. Like, they don't agree with it. It is not good. Mike Brown's dad, and Jared and Blueford and the Tyndalls, they're a different type of get down family. But at the bottom line, like, and we say this in our first responders guide, is we teach people how to respond. Like, it is not our job initially to politicize. It's never our job to politicize families unless they want to be politicized, right? So the time for political debate is not when we're trying to get justice for your loved one, right? Like, I really don't care if you voted for Trump, right? Or if you still love police. I mean, I've got work with families that still love police, but they still want justice for you, right? Like, in dealing with those complexities, that's irrelevant to me. What's relevant to me in that immediate moment is, what is the pathway to justice? We don't have time to get in that conversation. What kind of supports do you need? And how do we humanize your loved one? And then, and most of our families, like, stick with us. And so then over time, right, we invite them to different political education classes. If they want to come, great. If not, okay, or involve them in policy fights or whatever, because ultimately they should be the face of this movement. Like, ultimately, I should not be running the Anti-Police Terror Project, right? Like, ultimately, Eric Salgado's sister should be running the Anti-Police Terror Project. Did I answer all your questions about families?
Yeah, there's a couple other ones. I want to see if we can get a couple more in before we close. I want to respect your time as well as others. We had a question submitted by one of our correspondents, Mary Lou, and you mentioned earlier that police terrorists attack on not only the body but the mind and the soul, and described it as a panic reaction. You described the physical panic reaction, and her question was, how do you envision or see mental health providers supporting organizing spaces?
So we actually do that. So there's a bunch of places or several places where examples I can give. So I mentioned that for the families to regurgitate their story over and over again, how traumatizing that is. And so APTP and Justice Teams Network, we started providing healers to go, we stipend them to go to Sacramento and be there for the families when they come out. There was, when we do town hall, so there was a town hall on the utilization of military equipment on the streets. And we were asking people to come tell their stories, had healing people in the room. So we're really focused on introducing healing justice, not as a tactic, but as a strategy that's really integrated in every single thing we do. You can find our healing justice guide on the Justice Teams Network site. Pre-COVID, like at the King Day, the last two King Day actions, we've had entire healing centers with massage and Reiki and counseling and, all of that. And then APTP is getting ready to launch. We've launched MH First Sacramento, which does mental health response without law enforcement. And we're getting ready to launch the hotline here in the city of Oakland. And so we're increasingly incorporating healing justice and mental health and emotional health support into the work.
Awesome. Just last two questions. So in this moment, there's a lot of people who've been inspired to act, some people for the first time, and some people may be re-inspired. What's your advice or your message to them in this moment?
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And how can folks connect with your organization or your organizations?
Yep, so antipoliceterrorproject.org. We're also very active on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. justicesteamsnetwork.org. We're kind of active on Facebook and Twitter. And then you can always catch me on Facebook. I'm very easy to find, or on Twitter at Kat's Commentary.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, if you want to catch more of Kat's commentary, you're listening to Kat Brooks. Now, she's also the co-host of UpFront on KPFA, and so you can hear her Monday through Friday from 7 to 9 a.m. And again, Kat is one of the co-founders of the Anti-Police Terror Project. Right now, you're tuned in to Oakland Voices Tonight. Oakland Voices is a storytelling program that empowers Oakland residents to tell stories that are important to them and their communities. Oakland Voices is a program of the Maynard Institute for Journalism Education. And so since 1977, the Maynard Institute has worked on making sure that all segments of our society are fairly and accurately portrayed in media. And so you can learn more about Oakland Voices on our website, oaklandvoices.us. That's OAKLANDVOICES.us. So again, thank you all for being present. Again, thank you, Pat, for your time. And it's good to see you.
You too. Y'all take care.
Peace, everybody. I don't have a very cool sign off yet, so I'm gonna just tell y'all, wash your hands, safely social distance, but don't be socially isolated. For our Oakland Voices folks, we'll tap in with you all very shortly. But again, thank you all for being present. Have a good night.